This is your daily dose of all things royal. Welcome back, my gorgeous good-looking friends. A lot of really important things going on in the world today. More important than Meghan Markle's stupid holiday lunch with her as ever whatever. Nothing really exciting or new here, aside from the addition of hot drinks, as well as a $64 plus shipping and handling candle. In addition, she's added more liquor to her liquor store. And I think many of us here could care less. While everyone is distracted here with this crap, I want to talk about what I see becoming very important for us to pay attention to. It appears that the efforts for global censorship and control of information, as well as eroding privacy rights, has stepped up a couple notches. The First Amendment here in the United States is definitely under attack by foreign governments like the UK, EU, we have Australia being a part of this, Canada, all putting pressure on these social media companies to comply with their laws that they have been pushing out. And then add on top of it the Trojan horse of keeping the kids safe online with now enforcing age verification in certain countries like Australia and the UK. And the goal of doing this is not to protect the kids. This is to put pressure on the social media companies to adopt a global policy in protecting the children, mining user data, as well as content moderation in order to avoid whatever penalties and fines that these laws have put into place. And you notice how aggressive it became after Elon Musk bought over Twitter and the government no longer had that access of colluding with all these platforms because it was exposed that they were literally censoring Americans and violating the First Amendment. So now a way to get around that is getting our foreign allies like the UK, Australia, or Five Eyes to then go ahead and pass these laws to now put the pressure externally onto the United States to tear it down. And who is at the forefront in heading this up to make sure that it doesn't fail this go around? Well, that would be Barack Obama.
In the spring of 2022, former President Barack Obama gave a major policy address at Stanford University's Cyber Policy Center, where he laid out a sweeping proposal for government censorship of social media platforms, including through the proposed Platform Accountability and Transparency Act.
What a coincidence that Prince Harry's senator buddy, Chris Coons from Delaware, is the one who introduced this Platform Accountability Act. Thank goodness this went nowhere, but Chris Coons is also behind now the KOSA bill.
6 days later, President Joe Biden's Department of Homeland Security announced that it had created a disinformation governance board to serve as an Orwellian ministry of truth with the clear goal of controlling the information Americans could access online. The heart of Obama's vision for internet censorship was legislation which would have given extraordinary powers to the U.S. government's National Science Foundation to authorize and fund supposedly independent NGOs to censor the internet. The DHS and Stanford Internet Observatory, which was part of the Stanford Cyber Policy Center, pioneered the censorship by proxy strategy as a way to get around the First Amendment by first demanding censorship of posts raising concerns about the 2020 elections, and then in 2021 of posts that promoted so-called narratives expressing concern about the COVID vaccine. The 2024 election of President Donald Trump significantly reduced the threat of Obama, DHS, and NSF to censor the American people and defunded much of the censorship industrial complex. The Platform Accountability Act is going nowhere in Congress. Elon Musk fired most of the censorship staff at Twitter and has allowed a significantly wider range of speech on the platform. And even before Trump's election, Stanford donor Frank McCourt stopped funding the Stanford Internet Observatory after Public, Racket News, and the House Weaponization Subcommittee Chairman Jim Jordan exposed its central role in the DHS censorship by proxy scheme. But now, foreign governments, including ones in Europe, the UK, Brazil, Australia, and others, are demanding censorship, including of the American people. The risk is that US tech companies will find it significantly less expensive to have a single global censorship regime and just go along with foreign censorship requests. Facebook complied with Biden administration demands to censor because it needed Biden's help in dealing with European censorship officials. And the Brazilian government forced Elon Musk to continue censoring the Brazilian people after it froze Starlink's assets. and public has now discovered that the Stanford Cyber Policy Center, which is led by Obama's former ambassador to Russia, Michael McFaul, is at the heart of a new secretive and possibly illegal censorship initiative that appears even more ambitious than the one that Obama proposed in 2022. On September 24th, the Cyber Policy Center hosted a secret dinner between its leaders and top censorship officials from Europe, UK, Brazil, California, and Australia. The meeting was titled, quote, Compliance and Enforcement in a Rapidly Evolving Landscape. Frank McCourt, the same person behind the Stanford Internet Observatory, financed the gathering through his Project Liberty Institute, or PLI, toward which he gave $500 million to, quote-unquote, strengthen democracy and, quote, foster responsible technology. Public emailed all 21 participants and organizers and only heard back from 3, PLI, the Australian government, and the European Union, which declined to comment because, even though public gave it over 24 hours, a spokesperson said that we would need several days. We will update this article if they or others respond. Quote, PLI has made unrestricted gifts to several academic research programs, including Stanford University, a spokesperson said. PLI does not receive funding from governments, intergovernmental organizations, or large technology companies.
Look, I think we all know that Harry and Meghan are tied to this, but just to show you in the grant making with PLI, you can see that they're giving money to Common Sense Media, as well as working with Cortico. All of these organizations, Knight Foundation, Reid Hoffman, all are connected to Harry and Meghan. Harry and Meghan have given money to Cortico. They also have supported Common Sense Media. They're in partnership with Knight Foundation. Clearly, they're heavily embedded with this network. But what they're doing is trying to hide it better through several layers now.
But PLI's own policy blueprint reveals that it is demanding a single total global censorship regime and intends to use the EU's market power, known as the Brussels effect, to force big tech companies to comply. The blueprint calls for governments to, quote, recommit to a single global internet with, quote, regulatory interoperability and oversight to achieve a single unified market and to use the large size of the EU market to, quote, drive bilateral and multilateral agendas to formally enshrine reciprocal guarantees. A spokesperson for the Australian government said, whilst in attendance at Stanford for the 2-day conference, some attendees, including trust and safety researchers, industry, civil society, and government representatives, were also invited to attend an informal gathering roundtable event organized by Stanford University entitled Compliance and Enforcement in a Rapidly Evolving Landscape. This roundtable did not involve any discussion of compliance coordination or regulatory information sharing. The Australian spokesperson claimed that e-safety has no role in regulating hate speech or disinformation. E-safety has no remit or interest in regulating the affairs of other nations, nor does it have any role in diplomatic, trade, or other government-to-government relations. But it also said, as the internet is global and functions irrespective of national borders, by necessity, e-safety collaborates with law enforcement, other government agencies, and non-governmental partners around the world, including in the United States. The leaked agenda's stated purpose was to, quote, discuss the state of compliance and enforcement in order to identify where data research and expertise can enable more effective compliance with and enforcement of existing policy. Moreover, much of the following 2 days of the public conference were focused on coordinating government censorship, so-called regulation, of social media platforms, and the other nations that attended the meeting are all intensively involved in censoring their citizens and U.S. tech companies. And the head of Australia's e-safety, Julie Inman Grant, who was the keynote speaker at the Stanford Foreign Censorship meeting, is also the head of a global government censorship network that serves as the forum, she told the World Economic Forum, to help us coordinate, build capacity, and do just that. We use the tools that we have and can be effective, but we know we're going to go much further when we work together with other like-minded independent statutory authorities around the globe. As such, the people who are demanding censorship are once again spreading disinformation about what they are doing. All of this is happening in a context of global censorship intensifying. The UK government arrests 30 people a day for offensive social media posts, is attempting to censor 4chan, which has no servers in the UK, and will mandate digital IDs for employment, which may give unprecedented control to politicians and bureaucrats to censor. The Brazilian government has for years been censoring journalists and policymakers, incarcerating people for legal social media content, and threatening prosecution of journalists, including myself. and several European nations are censoring and arresting their citizens, preventing opposition political candidates from running for office, and preparing to implement digital IDs. So why did the Stanford Cyber Policy Center hold this meeting in the first place? And what is its strategy for global censorship? Who leaked the agenda to public and why? And what can be done to stop Stanford, Brazil, Australia, the EU, and others from realizing their totalitarian censorial vision? The Stanford Cyber Policy Center and the other participants in the global censorship meeting have close ties to the U.S. foreign policy establishment. Public and others documented earlier this year how the State Department and USAID had apparently funded disinformation initiatives through the so-called Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project, OCCRP, and other supposedly independent new organizations. The PLI, in its censorship vision statement, said explicitly that it sought government funding for censorship. It called for governments to, quote, strategically harness foreign assistance for people-centric digital capacity building using funds like those administered by the State Department/CDP and multilateral organizations to develop technical pilots and governance infrastructure this new paradigm demands. Also said it wants to focus the US-EU digital relationship on this shared vision for the future. Now, one of the multilateral organizations appears to be the World Economic Forum, which declared misinformation to be the most important problem in the world and advocates global censorship by supposedly non-governmental actors of US tech firms. What's more, Stanford and PLI appear to be seeking to embed themselves as quote-unquote government partners for censorship. The Australian government's statement to public, it revealed that it had chosen Stanford University's social media lab, which co-hosted the foreign censorship meeting with Stanford Cyber Policy Center, as its, quote, lead academic partner. This is very similar to the censorship by proxy model. The purpose appears to be to create the veneer of independence and civil society support for government censorship, while the heavy focus on protecting children has been how leaders of the censorship industrial complex have defended their work ever since they were exposed by the Twitter files in 2022 and 2023. Notably, protecting children is Australia's main justification for implementing its digital ID. The September 24th Stanford meeting included other advocates of foreign censorship, including a UK representative of its media regulation agency Ofcom, the deputy consul for the Brazilian government in the US, Mariana Ferreira Teil, who is behind UN and multilateral efforts to monitor and censor disfavored views, including on climate change, the Knight Foundation's Alyssa Cooper, who is organizing a 2025 meeting on how to use EU censorship law as a, quote, new global standard for platform regulation, the EU government's Gerard de Graaf, liaison to the US tech community on censorship, and Stanford's own Kang Xing-jin, who conducted COVID censorship while head of health policy at Facebook. The keynote speaker at Stanford's foreign censorship meeting was Australia's top censor, Julia Inman-Grant, an American who once told a reporter that the CIA had tried to recruit her, but she had said no. Last year, the leader of the Stanford Internet Observatory admitted that she had worked for the CIA for 4 years. As Australia's e-safety commissioner, Inman-Grant organized the Global Online Safety Regulators Network, which includes censors from around the world, including Australia, France, Ireland, South Africa, Korea, the UK, and Fiji. We have a big stick, she boasted, that we can use when we want to. They're going to be regulated in ways that they don't want to be regulated, unquote. She also called for a digital ID, which Australia is putting into place. Others who attended the meeting included Tom Kemp, who's the head of New California Internet Regulation Agency and author of a book, Containing Big Tech, about the need for governments to do more to control social media companies. Also in attendance is Alexios Mantsarilas, who is the head of the International Fact-Checking Network and criticized Meta's decision to stop using fact-check groups like his. And finally, Matt Moyle, a former Meta election integrity censorship official who argues that democracies must, quote, fix the feed to prevent disinformation and hate speech from proliferating. The head of McCourt's PLI is Tamika Tilleman, who is Hillary Clinton's speechwriter and a senior staffer on the U.S. Senate Foreign Relations Committee advising Obama, Biden, and former Secretary of State John Kerry. Tilleman earned degrees from Yale and the Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies. As such, Stanford Cyber Policy Center held last month's secret meeting to continue the global censorship efforts envisioned by Obama and partially implemented under the Biden administration. Not just Tilleman, but many others have strong ties to the foreign policy establishment and the U.S. security state. Their strategy remains censorship by proxy, but is today globalized, with the proxy they hope to censor Americans being the Confederation of Governments organized by Inman Grant. The conference underscores the importance of globalizing the censorship industrial complex to the foreign policy establishment, Democrats in the United States, and left-wing governments abroad. What the EU, UK, Australia, and Brazil all have in common is that they are controlled by the left. Even after we and others expose their censorship initiatives, embarrassing them, they keep moving forward, constantly inventing new justifications, with child protection and AI being the latest predicates for censorship. They are constantly seeking to change norms, carefully embedding their more totalitarian and less popular agenda items into more popular packages of protecting privacy, children, and avoiding future harm from AI. But anyone who looks at the agenda can see what they are doing, which is why someone leaked it to Chairman Jordan. That whistleblower recognized the threat that this effort at global censorship poses. And the censors are clearly embarrassed, which is likely why only 3 of the 21 participants responded to public, with the EU claiming it needed more time. We know McCourt is rightly sensitive to how bad this makes him look, as it was McCourt who cut off funding to the Stanford Internet Observatory after its censorship by proxy scheme became public. Importantly, this September 24th meeting changes our own understanding of the history of the censorship industrial complex. We already knew that Obama's spring 2022 speech to the Stanford University Cyber Policy Center was significant, particularly given its timing just before the launch of the DHS Disinformation Governance Board. But what has happened now underscores the central role played by leading Democrats, including McCourt, Cyber Policy Center head McFaul, and Tilleman. Over the last 3 years, we have heavily documented the role of the intelligence community intermediaries in the censorship industry. The most recent meetings underscores how those intermediaries can seamlessly move across borders and into new institutions, private and public, when the older ones have been publicly discredited, defunded, or taken over by Republicans. Thanks for listening.
Brilliant journalism from Michael Schellenberger. If you can support Public, please go over there and subscribe to him. He definitely is on the pulse with this, along with Mike Benz. These people truly are getting out of hand with this, and Harry and Meghan are the shiny objects that are distracting everyone. But behind the scenes, this is what they are doing. The First Amendment is truly being attacked at every single angle. I think it's worth mentioning that aside from the EU, you have King Charles's realms with Australia, Canada, and the UK, as well as King Charles's son in the United States, trying to tear down our constitutional rights. So you got to ask the question, because a lot of roads all tie back to the UK. Is the UK really America's ally? Especially when the son of the king is here in the United States undermining American civil rights. You got to ask that question. Why is this being allowed? Now, I know everybody is frustrated that we're seeing nothing happen, but I think all this activity going on with Europe and the UK and Australia putting pressure on social media companies here in the United States is going to force Congress to do something about it, which I am confident that Harry's name is going to come up because he is tied to practically all of this, especially when it comes to Baroness Kidron of Five Rights Foundation. And we'll get into that a little more tomorrow. But what do you guys think? Definitely leave your thoughts below. As always, I will be back with more content. But until then, please be safe, and I'll talk to you later. Bye.
Such a fraud.